If any political party wants to be in power and retain power, they need to sustain the youth vote. St. Lucia's youth reshaped the March to Independence. They provided the fuel which squashed the status quo in the mid-1980s. They revolutionized their place at the political altar, and theirs became a voice sought after by every political organization. The champions, Mario Michel, Ernest Hilaire, Henry Charles, and Henry Mangal, at one point or another, steered the St. Lucia National Youth Council and shaped its ideology and culture. Today's NYC represents the collective voices of all St. Lucian youth between the ages of 10 and 35. A key part of their mandate involves advocacy on behalf of young people to ensure that there is equal access to quality education at all levels. As they celebrate 35 years, this documentary looks back at the formation, the metamorphosis, the successes and the challenges of the organization, and it answers two fundamental questions. Is the NYC a training camp for budding politicians? And two, is the National Youth Council still relevant in 2021 and beyond?
The era of the Rastafarian movement, the introduction into the political mainstream of a lot of persons like George Otlam and Peter Josie, who were outside of the mainstream of party politics, the introduction of a lot of young intellectuals into the whole front line of social and political activity. So a number of things like that culminated in the 70s with the whole independence movement and the period between 1974 and 1979, very hectic political activity.
You had the teachers and public servants on strike for higher wages around independence. And also you had people like George Odlum and Peter Josie and Alan Louisi, in a sense representing the cries of the dispossessed and the downtrodden. And young people were very inspired by that kind of rhetoric, that kind of representation.
You saw police stopping, searching youths, you saw all the tribulations, you know, of the late 70s, early 80s. Also a high level of consciousness in our society, Rastafarianism, reggae music. So in a sense, there was a certain consciousness, but it was more anti-establishment consciousness.
In 1982, I was a Form 3 student at St. Mary's College. You had the political upheaval in the country. You had independence in February 79. In July 79, you had a change of government with the Labour Party coming in. Then you had the issue of the leadership problems in the Labour Party. And then you had an interim government in 1982, early 1982. And then you had elections in May 1982. So we were very conscious of those struggles at the time. And at St. Mary's College, we were involved in political debate of what was happening in the country.
By 1982, you had a return to office of Sir John Compton and his brand of conservative politics, after a lot of persons thought that we had seen the back of that and there was a new era of progressive politics. So Sir John returned in 1982, and there was supposed to be a return to stability and the good old ways. That didn't exactly happen though, because although the St. Lucia Labour Party found itself in that 5-year period between 82 and 87, trying to consolidate and build back, you had the likes of George Odlum in full restless and reckless mode, regular demonstrations and political activities of all kinds, and and young people more and more, as I said, being thrust in the middle of it. First, you have to take the demographics of the era. The young population, the sector of youth, was at that time by far the dominant sector in the population. So that anything you wanted to do, it was important whether to get the youth vote for political activity, the youth audience for social activity, the youth market for economic activity. The young people were thrust very much into the mainstream of every aspect of national life. And yes, they did grow restless. They did want to see more for themselves than they thought that society was giving to them. Youth were characterized in different ways. You want to talk about indiscipline, so let's talk about young people. You want to talk about crime, so let's talk about young people. And it reached a stage where young people decided, no, you don't define us. You don't put us into categories. We have views, we have voices, and we wanted to be heard.
We felt that the voice of young people was not adequately represented, and so that sort of drove us to agitate for better representation for young people to be here.
Repression has certainly increased. At all levels, the whole society is stuttering and falling apart. There's a great deal of division. People are talking about the possibility of civil war, that sort of thing.
You must almost go back to what was happening globally. In '79, you had the Grenada Revolution. You had the Sandinista Revolution in Nicaragua. The whole world was going through a kind of leftist shift. You know, you had all over. I mean, Cuba was a rise. You had in Africa, you know, a lot of changes taking place. You had the apartheid system in South Africa, and the whole world was chanting down apartheid. And I remember we taking part in the Free Nelson Mandela campaign, because the whole world was going through that phase. Then you had the Grenada, the overthrow of Maurice Bishop and the invasion in 1983. And then all over the region, they were setting up SSUs after the Grenada Revolution in 1979. And there was a lot of talk about, you know, socialism on the rise and communism on the rise, and Reagan in particular, the need to suppress, you know, all of this. So you can understand the status quo being a little cautious that all of a sudden we have a mass of young people trying to get organized and might become uncontrollable. And I think rather than seek to engage, the response was, let us stifle. But you can't stifle young people. You really cannot.
We were told that they had a government committee that was actually appointed by government, by cabinet, that was preparing for the celebrations of International Day of the Youth. That's around 82 going into 83. And our position was, you have a cabinet appointed committee. We look at the people. There were some of the same people from the old NYC who were no longer youth in any way, who did not represent in any way. They understood the thing of youth. And we said, we have a problem with that. I mean, here it is that the United Nations has made a decision for countries to recognize or to commemorate International Day of the Youth. And the theme was supposed to be peace, participation, and progress. And young people are not being allowed to participate in, as leaders. We just want, so these guys, we come to a meeting and these guys show us a program that they have for the thing of the year. And so he was like, hey, where's this? We're not on that.
When I got involved in NYC, you know, I was 17 years old. And you're hearing about this NYC and this youth thing, and United Nations want a year for youths and youth rights and youth organization. And you're like, yeah, man, you know, that's the thing we should be involved in.
The main challenge at the time was actually the position of the Minister for Youth at the time, the Honorable Romanas Lancico. He was adamant that he as minister would not recognize the National Youth Council. And I think the president at the time spoke about, mediation efforts. There was a mediation effort where a committee was appointed by the Attorney General. It included, I think it was chaired by the late Errol Walker. And you had efforts made at mediation. Even the Prime Minister at the time, Sir John Compton, A meeting was held with him on that matter. And I mean, at those meetings, privately, we would be told that, listen, really you all should be recognized. But, you know, because of the position of the minister, we couldn't proceed with it. The NYC was formed in April, and the NYC was actually launched in November. So between April and November, there were several efforts at mediation. And until the young people said, listen, this thing is not going to work. We cannot wait on a minister to recognize us. We have the confidence that we have done what we need to do. So we are going to launch our organization on the 17th of November, 85, which was International Students' Day.
A national consultation was held in Soufriere, which brought together youth leaders from across the country. And the young people decided that this was our moment. This was a gathering of youth from every district in St. Lucia. And this was our moment. When they were asked to discuss the problems affecting young people, the lack of a youth representative body was very much in the forefront of that. And when asked to discuss solutions, a major solution was, yes, let's have our national youth organization. And so it was that out of the national consultation in Soufriere came the formation of a National Youth Council and the election of an executive.
Look at the 1985 programming. How are we going to present that package of programs for young people that would leave a legacy, you understand, of continuous engagement, you know, with our young people going forward? And so that committee was established by the ministry in 1984, towards the end of 1984. And so they were thrust with that responsibility for programming in 1985. If there was anything that was right, the mood was right with respect to the young people on the ground. When it came to the government end, we had Minister Romanus Lancico, who had a challenge in terms of the way that organization was formed. And so he held on to that challenge. And of course, it became a personal battle between himself and Mario Michel, who was the leader, you know, of the youth movement during that time. So that confrontation between Mario and the minister, you know, resulted, of course, in government not giving recognition, not giving formal recognition to the NYC. But the work that the NYC was doing was always recognized in terms of, you know, young people being at the forefront.
It started with when we came out of Soufriere, the National Youth Council was established. Sunday, 14th April 1985, an executive was elected. Monday, press release and so on, announcing the establishment of the council, the election of its new executive with Mario as its president. That was not the way the minister had written the script. And, you know, how dare you all just come and take over our national consultation.
The first news item on Radio St. Lucia, which was the government state-owned radio, 6 or 6:30 in the morning next morning, was the news that the Minister of Youth, the Honorable Romanus Lancico, had said that he is not going to recognize the National Youth Council because a bunch of communists had taken over the council. And referred to us as communists because we had the audacity to state our position as young people and to challenge what is an oppressive system to us.
And for the next 2 years, between April of 1985, when NYC was formed, and April of 1987, when Romanus Lancico ceased to be the Minister of Youth, he dedicated a lot of those 2 years to just bashing the NYC, bashing its leadership, and one particular member of its leadership in particular.
The National Youth Council had a lot of what we call one-day activities as well as weekend activities. In the early period, the one-day activities would be opportunities for young people to come and discuss what is happening in the individual communities, what is happening in the country, what is happening with the National Youth Council. A lot of those sessions were held in Castries. We use the Paris Center quite often, where the executive led by Mario Michel would receive the comments, the advice, the complaints of the young people from throughout the country. This is where a lot of young people really started to admire Mario as a leader, that he would give everybody the opportunity to speak, he would listen, and sometimes we felt that there was too much repetition, some of the hotheads, too much repetition, and some of us, would want to bring an end to a session where people were articulating their views. But Mario was that kind of patient individual. Then you had the weekend activities, which were essentially training activities. So you had sessions where people were trained in various skills, developing their leadership, how to form a club, how to manage an organization, how to resolve conflict, manage and resolve conflict, those types of things. Then you had activities where people were trained in community mobilization. People were trained in animation skills.
We had as a group in Monciso, can we come to your meeting? And they'll tell us, come, we'll drive down there. There's a meeting in Soufrière. Call a meeting of all youth groups in Soufrière. Go and meet them, sit down with them, talk to them about young people fighting to be the center of development in St. Lucia. Government policy should not exist anymore without putting a priority for young people, without taking into account the needs, the dreams, the aspirations of young people. We systematically went around mobilizing young people, bringing them together and explain to them the necessity for them to work together in the coordinating structures to organize cricket, football, culture, public speaking competitions. The NYC Youth Debate became a major feature in those days. And then we started to get support, to promote the involvement of women in leadership and in society and in development. So the NYC now found itself getting support internationally to deal with issues like, women's rights, the environment, fight against substance abuse.
When we started to get funds from regional and international agencies, the quality of our programming was very beneficial to young people and also very attractive to a number of them. We had regular weekend workshops and seminars where, for instance, this month we go to Dennery, where we have a weekend activity at the Dennery Secondary School or the Dennery Primary School, bringing together young people from all over the island living and working together for a weekend. And you create just a good vibes. We started to run into serious problems with numbers because you have this activity in Soufrière, this weekend activity, and you start to have more people than you can physically cater for. And we then had to find new modes of managing these things because the NYC, being involved in NYC was a popular thing, was something that people regarded as a good thing, as a desirable thing.
This message is brought to you by the Emergency Battery Broadcasting Authority. In the event you should hear this sound, or this one, you're probably stranded, desperate, stuck in the car with the kids, holding up traffic. Panic sets in. You start to rethink your choice in battery. Oh, how you wish you could be back on track. You dial 72-TRACK, and within minutes, there's a TRACK battery technician on the scene. He diagnoses your problem, he installs a new battery, he validates your warranty, and you're on your way! TRACK batteries and roadside assistance, only available from Williams Equipment, located next to Caribbean Metals Limited in Union. Telephone 72-TRACK, that's 728-7225. TRACK batteries, moving forward.
Hey, stop it.
That's what I'm here for.
For over 138 years, we've had your back.
From home contents to medical, auto to business continuity, GTM Insurance. Sound, solid, and reliable.
I was the president of the National Youth Council when that election came around, and we had to navigate very delicately, but confidently. We were not afraid to state the NYC's position, so that, for instance, we stated clearly that we were supporting young candidates in the electoral process, in the persons of Minister Rambali and Sarah Flood Bowbray at the time. Yes, they were on the Labour Party ticket, but if an organization representing young people cannot support young people in the political process, then I'm not sure who it is representing. I did introduce Mario at his luncheon, and I made it clear to the NYC that I was doing that in a personal capacity. But I was the president at the time.
For 4 years, I advocated for full recognition of the National Youth Council, establishment of a subvention for NYC, universal secondary education, end of a shift system, the creation of adequate national sporting facilities, and so on, increasing opportunities for scholarships and so on for young people. So when in 1997 I became a minister, I mean, I was a lawyer, pretty well regarded in that regard at the time. In fact, I resigned my position as president of the Bar Association in order to contest elections. So there were a lot of people who thought, well, naturally Mario Michel is going to be the Attorney General. But as I said, in all the years before that, you didn't hear me go in and talk about the need for better laws and this. That's not what I was canvassing on. That was not the platform that I mounted. The platform that I mounted was about youth and sports facilities and educational opportunities. So when I got a chance to be part of a government, I felt duty-bound to go and serve in the areas that I advocated for and canvassed for.
When he came in 97, and he was appointed Minister for Youth, within his first 100 days in office, a National Youth Council Incorporation Act was passed in the Parliament of St. Lucia to recognize the National Youth Council. And that's not just words, that's actions. Okay? And secondly, in the supplementary budget, he transferred what was under an amount which was under his ministry to a subvention for the National Youth Council.
However, it did not mean smooth sailing for the organization. Although you had good PSCs and youth directors, Henry Mangal, Ernest Hilaire, I think even in terms of the programming itself, we thought that it was lacking a lot. Just in terms of the formulation of the youth policy, we thought that even though you had a youth policy that was passed, the action plan connected to the youth policy was really never put in place. So though you had a supposedly friendly government or a friend of the National Youth Council, we did have our battles in terms of programming.
I really became involved with NYC in the mid 2005 thereabouts. My initiation into it was in the late 1990s, attending one of the General Assemblies which was held in my community of Choiseul. Veronica Snack was elected president at that time. I wasn't sure what NYC was at the time. To me, it sounded like New York City. And to be honest, going in there I saw some nice people there, and I wanted to, make some friends.
I have always seen the NYC as the organization that is responsible for representing the voices of young people, the collective voices of young people, and being that organization that basically helps holistically develop young people in St. Lucia.
Officially, my involvement with NYC started when I became the first vice president of the council, but probably from the age of 14, I had several informal stints with the NYC. Understanding the St. Lucia National Youth Council as the umbrella arm of youth organizations in St. Lucia, the district youth councils make up the NYC. these district youth councils are fed or comprised of community groups and committees. So I was part of the Grosley Community Action Group. I was part of the Grosley Youth Month. Eventually became the president of the Grosley Youth Council, and eventually became first vice president of the St. Lucia National Youth Council. The St. Lucia National Youth Council more or less is the national representative for youth. Its efforts are supposed to be driven by the youth of the country, and it's supposed to be done through a highly participatory process. Our motto is participation, peace, and progress, and it speaks to the fact that through engagement, any issues that affect youth, that they would be actioned and or advocated or lobbied through the council. We are also highly involved in education and empowerment of youth so that they know what their rights are and what the opportunities are, and represent them or facilitate them in representing us nationally at different levels.
So coming into NYC as president, I inherited, no doubt, a more structured organization in the sense of a secretariat. In terms of administrative staff, in terms of more connectivity and access to youth and sports councils in comparison to when I was general secretary with Marvin Edgar. And so within that period, you could see that there was some wins, there was some growth.
Culturally, the second vice is responsible for the education portfolio of the National Youth Council, and to a great extent acts as a liaison between the students branch and the central executive of the NYC. So more or less an overall view of education and student governance.
My involvement in the youth movement, I think, really started when I became a teacher at the George Charles Secondary School. And I really thought that instead of just being a teacher, I needed to be involved in a lot more. And so we established the Fuasho Youth Group. A lot of us got involved in the Fuasho Youth Group. And from then on, because the group was part of the Castries South East Youth and Sports Council, generally we became involved in the works of the National Youth Council. And at that time, really, it was more or less just representing the young people of Fuasho. There was never really a targeted approach to at least program that would target in certain young people within the inner city. And so we thought that from Fuasho that we really wanted to make a difference nationally and give representation from young people from what was quote unquote the ghetto areas. Very early, I actually became the Assistant General Secretary underneath the presidency of Veronica Snack. So we were very much involved in the formulation of the youth policy. And so that was a big thing for us. A lot of trying to revive the youth and sports councils, ensuring that programs moved away from sports and focused more on terms of development in itself.
This is Andre and Jenny Joseph, a typical hard-working St. Lucian couple. And this is their daughter, Anna. Here they are in the new car they've always dreamed of. Here they are in their house furnished on hire purchase. Unfortunately, this is Andre the day he was laid off, and this is his wife 1 month later. This led to their financial problems and a lot of credit card debt. This is Andre and Jenny at Monrepo Credit Union getting all their outstanding debts consolidated. This is Andre back at work. This is Jenny stronger and better than ever. With the Monrepo Credit Union on their side, they can get through whatever life throws their way. Monrepo Cooperative Credit Union. Our people, our community, our credit union.
So we did some very strong advocacy as it pertains to, student conditions within schools. At that time, we had problems with the then principal of the Safa Lewis Community College, Urban Dolo, when there was the issue in terms of the school furniture at Safa and the tuition fees. I think there was a year where SAFA released the tuition fee schedule within 2 weeks of the reopening of school, and we just wouldn't have it. So we went on to the media, it was a big issue within the school, and he called us to a board meeting of the Board of Governors at SAFA, and we sat down, and then this is where we really expressed how we felt about the situation. We got an apology, and we got the college to agree to putting in place a payment plan for students, disadvantaged students, to be able to pay their fees within good time. So a lot of my work within the NYC right now is to really build relationships with young people across the board, not just within our formal structure, but outside of formal structures, and sort of rebranding the organization to be relevant to the current day young person. Beanfield Secondary School, the Students' Council there, had a particular issue at the time in terms of their timetable. I think they had issues with the time allotted for lunch, and the students at that time felt that they needed to at least have sufficient time for lunch. So the students actually, they went around within the school setting, sort of educating students within the setting as to, this is what we can do if we have a bit more time for this break. This is what we think this should be, and this is how we think it should be rolled out. So they went ahead, they made it a very prominent issue within the school, and then they were able to actually get to the administration to be able to renegotiate that timetable and to make the setting at school something that the students were able to benefit from. That's one example.
In the past, there seemed to have been a disconnect between the NYC and any organization that was not part of the Youth and Sports Councils. You had like the Scouts movement, the church groups. If they were not connected to the Youth Council at the community level, then really and truly we found ourselves at loggerheads a lot of times, and persons thought that the Youth Council, the National Youth Council, was a politically biased organization. I say politically biased because a lot of times persons thought that it was the youth arm of the Central Labour Party. So we really tried to, during our tenure at that time, bridge that gap. So ensuring as much as possible that we invited them to activities, we participated in the activities, was a way of rebuilding that network and that relationship.
I think NYC had sort of lost its clout in terms of making a contribution at the national level. So people felt, boy, almost every other week, we had something to say. But I think really that's what one of the major roles of a NYC is, to be that advocacy group, continue to champion the issues of young people. And I think we sometimes get caught up in the programming, what are you doing for youth? I think that's really the responsibility of the government. Our role as the NYC is really championing that. What are the key things that youth need? I think it was Mario Michel who said it more eloquently. If the youth movement and the government are in total accord, there is something wrong with the youth movement. And if the youth movement and the government are in total discord, then there is something wrong with the government.
I think young people should play a greater role in the politics of our country, because politics is basically about the making of decisions and so on.
I had the distinct opportunity to work with the Marvin Edgar presidency, and that was a very tumultuous time with the relationship between NYC and the government. The president at the time had a very militant approach to his advocacy.
Coming in, one of our earliest engagements with central government was with the Prime Minister at the time, Dr. Kennedy Anthony. We sat with him and we highlighted some of what our priority areas were, and that was again informed by coming out of General Assembly, having a national executive retreat and determining what we take. We recognize that in order to have been more of we wanted the Secretariat to be more of a hub, a safe space that young people can feel free to come in and out of. We're in the city, and so we pursued having a home, a bigger home, as opposed to just a limited office space for the NYC. And there was discussion of the property at Le Talk, formerly Golden Hope, and so there was that discussion. The national youth policy as well was also a high priority, given what we inherited was at a draft stage for many years. And we also pursued having less, we wanted youth parliament exercises to be less practice, less mock parliament, but to institutionalize in the way that Suriname has youth parliament.
I participated in youth parliament 3 times, but I remember 2012 because I sat as the youth governor general, which was the same 2012 if I remember correctly. And so there were some actions, a few actions in terms of youth policies and stuff that had to be done.
To the 6th sitting of this Honorable House to discuss the business of the day concerning the youth of St. Lucia.
The youth constitute the singularly most important resource of our nation.
What continues the drive for me is to see when an activity, after you accomplish an activity, how when young persons come to you and tell you how they benefit from the activity, how they enjoyed it. When we do our outreach, our charity programs like providing hamper donations within the community, when you look on some of these persons' faces that they have not seen anybody grant them any donation, but they're so thankful for what you brought to them. So for me, that's the success in it for me, honestly, just the what you see out there on persons' faces and the thanks that they give you and how impactful your work is towards them. I would say that the National Youth Council is very supportive of Grizzly North. I have that communication there's a very strong communication in between the executive and myself. I have served with some of the current members on the national executive when I was there. I know that they are supportive of my initiatives if I ever called on them to be at an activity or called on them for any sort of advice or promotion of the activity, that they would be willing to assist in that regard.
NYC's election campaigns are just as crazy as national elections. If you're not in the belly of the beast, you won't understand. You do have serious investments that go into campaigns, from financial investments to ensure as much as possible that you're on the ground 24/7, the mobilization and the lobbying. Before when I did challenge when I made my challenge for the presidency of the National Youth Council, it was first well received. However, I think you had stalwarts, for whatever reason, thought that they had other persons in mind. And so there was, very early in the elections campaign, a move to get me to not run for president.
My name is Jeshon Andrew.
My name is Nias Alfred.
Johnny LeBon.
My name is Rejan Montut. I'm from the constituency of Grizzly.
To be their own face, their own voice. They need to be the ones talking about their problems.
The campaign itself and the election itself was very, very heated. Even at the campaign site and the election site, we had a lot of physical altercations that occurred. Physical altercations that occurred between myself and the late Sikh who passed away from Castry South. Again, that is really how serious the campaign was. After elections, we made a few reports. We had stones thrown through the glass of the National Youth Council with messages on it. So these are things that did not make the big, although we did report a few of them, and I think there was 1 or 2 media coverage on it, it did not really seem like it was a big thing for a lot of people. We found ourselves battling the absence of funds in the organization. We found ourselves having to develop the auditor's report, getting the auditor's report, and putting the finances of the organization together. And that was a very difficult task. We found ourselves at loggerhead with the ministry in terms of our finances not being made available at the time, but they had a rightful case because at that time our financial reports were not in order. And so I think it created further frustration. As a president, I took the decision to ensure that whatever finances that the organization had, that it went towards the bills of the organization. And I think it created a difference of opinion between myself and the rest of the executive. During that time period, they decided to pull away their support. But by that time, I had already sent in my resignation because I thought that we had a serious, disagreement in terms of how the organization should have gone. And so I resigned. Barry Job became the president. Then in 2006, I resigned in 2006. He became the president until 2007.
Some challenges during my tenure. You had the Bennett administration, which sort of, he didn't finish his term, and then Barry George took over. He was the first vice president at the time. And then we went for a period where, you know, NYC, we had lost our office. The respect for NYC had dwindled. We lost quite a bit of our representation on key statutory bodies. We were being sponsored by Kellogg's at that time, very, very well, and we'd lost that sponsorship. So one of my key things was, let's get that going once more, get all the NYCs in the region coming together and get their heads working. And by the time I had left, we were able to have the secretariat based right here. CDB was the one sponsoring that, and we had someone contracted to work with us for a few years to really get the Caribbean Youth Councils going. It was no longer CFY, it had become Caribbean Youth Council, CYC. One of the big disappointments for me in my presidency was constitution reform.
The NYC needs to revisit its structure. I think this executive understood that. This current executive understands that very well, and the one before that understands that very well. So I know they've been struggling to look at how can the constitution be restructured to do that. First of all, Youth and Sports Council solely recognize clubs in the community. And a lot of organizations in the community don't necessarily form part of the Youth and Sports Councils. Now, if you're a youth organization and you represent the youth in your current structure, you may be representing less than 1/3 of the actual youthful population. That is, and you don't have to do the math to know that, because very few young people form part of the Youth and Sports Councils. A large portion of them are either in other youth organizations that choose not to want to be part of the National Youth Council for whatever reason. Others are part of national organizations. Others really see the NYC as more of an elite organization or a political arm of political parties. NYC used to be painted as the arm of the Labour Party before. But if the NYC does not make that change, the organization will die. Point blank.
I watched him on the bed, knowing a man who has worked his entire life, can't afford the cost of his surgery or medication. Mom and I must sell barbecue tickets to help save his life. For less than $4 a day, the cost of a packet of gum, my dad could have been airlifted to get treatment. Some adults can be so insensitive with their lack of foresight. Now, Mom and I either have to watch him wither away or sell a whole lot more barbecue. Why? Because one person didn't care enough to plan.
GTM Medical Insurance. Less than $4 a day for the greatest peace of mind anyone could ask for. Call us today, 458-6300.
Anthony! Anthony! Anthony!
Anthony, I know you heard Gerald calling you outside. It must be one of your work tools he wants to borrow. Last time was the mixer, the pressure washer, the jackhammer. Now what?
Anthony!
Well, hello, Gerald. My husband isn't in right now. He's on the construction site. But he said, should you come over to give you this?
Williams Equipment? What's that?
They're located right next to Caribbean Metals in Union. They have every construction tool imaginable. You can buy or you can rent, from scaffolding to concrete vibrators, even vehicle batteries too. Don't forget, they're located right next to Caribbean Metals in Union.
Williams Equipment Sales and Rentals. Telephone 450-3272.
The connection we can have with NYC and Youth on Fire can be a really brilliant one. However, there is a problem with NYC meeting community development organization. But the organization, I think, needs to be decentralized. I think the NYC in itself as an organization should have personalities from communities around the country so that we'll see the really full energy that NYC has to give. Because it has what it has, however, it's just not trickling through. I have seen persons from my organization or from the community go into NYC, but they don't last because they get very frustrated. They get frustrated maybe because, again, as you said, maybe it's an elitist group. And maybe you're not welcomed or not belonged. The NYC has to be a bit more out there, more transparent. Young people do not know what the NYC is. Young people do not know what the NYC is. And even with all of our great vibe that we've done in the past 10 to 15 years, we have never gotten an award from the NYC. Never. With all of what we've done throughout the years in St. Lucia, going to perform at every community, and we did that on our own. We did that with our own finance, with our own grit, with our own passion. We did it. And to say that the NYC will be working in collaboration with Youth on Fire, I'm not saying that they haven't. Working in collaboration with us to see that we have done more for ancillary, or for St. Lucia.
Challenges is that funding has always been an issue. Right now we have a subvention that the NYC has had for the time that NYC began to receive a subvention from the government. We are trying to become self-sustaining as an organization, but with anything, the funding is definitely a problem because right now the funding that we get covers basically recurrent expenditure. So that is the one thing. The second thing I'd probably say in terms of challenges is the fact that, you know, our reach out there in the community, I don't think that it is where it's supposed to be right now. We are not reaching the young person on the ground that we know we want to reach. The purpose, the goal is to get to that point where we're able to reach every single young person in St. Lucia.
When you receive government funding, taxpayers' money, you have a responsibility and an obligation at the end of every year, you know, to account. Some people choose not to account and they just expect the government to give them the taxpayers' dollars. As taxpayers, we always want to know how our monies are spent. And I think what the NYC always needs to do is to make sure they submit those annual reports. But then they will tell you they're not able because they don't have the resources to do it. But Mario did it. He found ways. He found alliances.
If I were president now, one of the first things I would do, and I would hope that this executive, maybe they can do it now, is to renounce the subvention from government. I would do that first and foremost. I would renounce the subvention from government because I think sometimes, depends on the government, you're held ransom sometimes. You can never tell who's going to be Youth and Sports Director. You can never tell who's going to be Youth and Sports Minister. It will show your sign of independence and disconnect. I would advise the organization to do is to establish must start ensuring that it can facilitate and generate its own income. Social enterprising and organizations need to stop depending on donor funding. And the organization is heavily dependent on donor funding. And that basically dictates where and how you go forward. The organization must reflect and invest in a social enterprise that funds its own program. Next thing is critically, constitutional reform of the organization is very, very critical. The organization must ensure that its structures does not keep it bounded to a Youth and Sports Council structure that is failing.
I operate with an open-door policy. My Ministry of Youth Development and Sports, has had an open-door policy to see to it that the objectives of the National Youth Council are met in terms of having an open-door policy when it comes to the issues that they would bring out on a day-to-day basis. We have seen to it that we have available resources that would go to the programming or whatever cause that they would have brought up. So we have a very open policy that the National Youth Council can walk in anytime and have a dialogue with the Director of Youth or the PS or even myself. What I did too as when I became Minister of Youth is to decentralize the functions of, or to separate it, which is a better word, the programs of youth and of sports. So before I became Minister of Sports, the role of the director was twofold: Director of Youth and Director of Sports. So we had a separate designation for the Director of Youth, so that there's more concentration now on what's happening with youth development. And that has helped us on island greatly.
I think it's successive governments too lack consistency in certain things. For instance, as I said, having youth participation at key processes or youth engagement in key processes. So we'd have had a youth parliament, for instance, and try to assign it to the bill being discussed at the time or something. But whether it was access to the chambers or having a youth parliament presenting a Hansard, which is the document that captures all of the notes, and who even takes it on seriously, the lost opportunities for polls or consultations with young people, the fact that young people coming in needed support. The St. Lucia National Youth Council, not by extension, but also captures St. Lucia youth ambassadors. So UNDP would have had youth ambassadors, UNFPA. Most commonly, we have Commonwealth and CARICOM. So I was a Commonwealth Youth Ambassador, and my tenure was around the same time, just around the same time with that executive role. But I'm mentioning it because I think there were lost opportunities for proper orientation and synergies when it came to possibly representation and consistent support.
I can't recall when last I saw a comment, a full-fledged comment, a full-fledged release, a proper, I think, scrutiny of the national budget by the National Youth Council. That has not happened in maybe 2 or 3 executives. So when you go before the Prime Minister and you speak about allocations for young people, from what angle are you speaking when you have not even presented an analysis of the budget presented by government? So all of these things really and truly. And the final thing, NYC now and 15 years down the line must ensure as much as possible that any youth policy that exists must actually be a youth policy that is realistic. We have a youth policy now that has not gone before Parliament, that has not been debated. And the NYCs before on this one have remained a bit quiet about it. Why? Is it because of the government that's in power?
Has the NYC spoken about the impact of the demise of the banana industry on rural youth? You know, has the NYC spoken about the other type of issues, the issue of the rising cost of accommodation, the difficulty that young people are getting in things? Has the NYC spoken about how young people can offer new and innovative solutions to addressing issues of housing and other types of socioeconomic development challenges that young people face? So, I mean, we could always turn around and say, government, you ain't doing enough, done enough. And I will be the first to tell them, look, you all are nonsense. Because government has to create help create the enabling environment. But the NYC as an entity also have a responsibility to ensure that its constituents are mobilized, its constituents are involved, and that the constituents that it is representing and articulating the views of its constituents.
Another challenge, especially during our current climate, is the issue of politics, where everything that you see as an NYC gets branded one way or another political, whether it be something that is in favor of something or against something. Everything that you do, there is that aspect where people begin to question whether or not there are political motives.
Some people have unfairly criticized the National Youth Council as launching people into the St. Lucia Labour Party. But there are countless examples as well of people who left the National Youth Council and who went into the United Workers' Party. So that you have people like Edward Innocent, for instance, the late Edward Innocent, who was the MP for Soufrière on a UWP ticket. You had Ricky Alexander, who contested that seat and who didn't win. You had Marius Wilson, who was who won the Mico North seat on a UWP ticket and was at one time leader of the opposition on a UWP side. So, and you've had persons from both sides. So we are proud of that history, because if you're really agitating and you're advocating for involvement, then the political process is the next step.
I think the NYC must always be political, must never give up the right and, for me, a responsibility to be political. We must always be. There's too much going on now and then and in the future that needs people to speak up on in defense of young people.
What you want to guard yourself against is becoming partisan, but it will happen. That's the reality. I mean, we've had Jedia Jean-Pierre. She was the second vice in the executive before me. She went into politics. She became the press secretary. So you want young persons to get that experience, build the networks regionally, because what you find happens to some of our politicians, they get in there, they green, they don't have that experience, they don't understand their communities and their constituents.
I believe that some individuals on island, they hijack the constituency youth and sports council, okay, for their own political whims and fancies. And so little happens when this happens. This is an autonomous body, or it is supposed to be. So there shouldn't be any interference from government. Government is supposed to help, which we are doing. But I would want the National Youth Council to concentrate on making sure that all the District Youth and Sports Council are non-partisan. That would help St. Lucia Youth tremendously. Did you know that the subvention that I spoke about earlier, that is available to National Youth Councils, okay, and that we made available from the National Lotteries Authority, that some of the youth councils, year by year, allow this thing, to just stay there and not utilize? I mean, does that make any sense? It happens right now as we speak, okay? And then some youth and sports council will tell you that you don't do anything, or their rep don't do anything, but they have money available to them that they don't use, okay? Because they are not sufficiently organized.
There's power in numbers, and we believe that as many young people who are on board with championing the interests of youth, we will see a greater impact in terms of the representation of young people across the board. We believe that, yes, there are issues as it pertains to the challenges that young people face, particularly the NYC as a youth organization, but we believe that there's a lot more that can be done in ensuring that the voices of youth are heard. So as long as young people see themselves as partners in the development of our country, there will always be the need for an autonomous youth organization. And I believe that the NYC stands a great chance in ensuring that policymakers are held accountable. The only way that will be done is if young people see themselves as agents of social change, and the NYC is a conduit for that.
Directly to our policymakers, we continue to hear the narrative that the youth are the future, the youth are the future. However, I think the future is today. The future is now. It's time to stop the lip service, stop the tokenism, and put your money where your mouth is. If you believe in the development of young persons, you will show the young persons that you believe in their development and invest in them.
Never been told. Who'd go on and on, the fool has never been told.